Good morning. I would like to thank the choir for that moving song, their presentation. I would like to thank Miss Irene for her arrangement up here. I didn't have to look in the bulletin to know that she had done that, just like it's got a great big I stamped on it. And lastly, I'd like to say, Willie, you've already preached for today. You spoke to the people. You've did what God instructed you to do. Nancy came home from the food collection yesterday and said that Eric had the shingles and that she had talked with him and she was going to try to call Ken and see if he could share a little bit today. And I said, well, I think they're out of state. And she called Ken and Melinda and they're in Gatlinburg. I picked the phone up and called Eric and asked him would he like for me to share just a little bit. And he said, have at it. I know what it is to take prednisone. I took some of them once in my life. It was when Barron died, and I was supposed to speak at his funeral. And I was in a desperate situation. I had inflammation of the vocal cords, and I was losing my voice. Now, can you just imagine what that must have, Carolyn shaking her head, can you just imagine how traumatic that was for me? The thought of losing my voice made a lot of people happy, but that was kind of... I found it a little bit nervous. I'm just going to briefly touch on something that I had chosen. In fact, I actually took something out of the adult Sunday school quarterly for later in the year because I just did not have as much time as what I probably would have tried to have put into it had I known earlier, but I'm certainly not troubled by being up here this morning because temporary obstacles can be turned into stumbling blocks or stepping stones depending on how you want to approach them. And that's what all of life is basically a set of moving forwards and backwards and up and down and sideways and around and the kind of things that Willie thought he needed to carry tobacco off this week to be sold. But he didn't need to sell tobacco as much as he needed to pray for his father and to talk with his father. And things have a way of prioritizing themselves if we'll just focus on it and let it be that way. And I'm just going to share very briefly loving and just behavior from Romans, King James Version, 12th chapter, verses 9 through 21. And talking about how we have to deal with tragedy and how I don't care who you are, how wealthy, how educated, what you may own, where you may live, who you may know. First or last, it will knock on your door. We all know of individuals and can recall people and situations, friends, families that we think maybe perhaps, and I know we shouldn't think this, but have you ever thought that, or am I the only one that's ever thought, well, it certainly seems like they've had to endure more than their portion. I knew a family in Bailey up near Sims. They had two children. Their oldest son died at 17 in an automobile accident. The second son died at 17 with leukemia. And then the husband had a long, agonizing, prolonged bout with cancer. But I never heard that lady ever except in a cheerful voice. I never heard her utter a word of discouragement. I never heard her trying to place the blame or to have a pity party. And there's much to be learned from people that are strong in their faith. It says that even the ancient Greeks spoke about dealing with tragedy. Plato, some 400 years before the writing of the New Testament, before Paul even came on the scene, was talking about four virtues that he thought were the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, temperance, and courage. And then in Solomon, was Solomon not supposedly the wisest man that ever lived? In Solomon 8 and 7, if a man love righteousness, her labors are virtuous, for she teaches temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude. But from Paul's point of view, it was more than just rhetoric, more than just philosophy. And that's where he reached in the latter portions of the chapter today in that book, when he got down into the meat of the matter. And that's how it is with us. knowing God's Word, knowing the statutes of this country, knowing what one is supposed to do, and doing what we're supposed to do are two completely separate things. I mean, if I were driving down the highway this morning and the highway patrolman stopped me and he said, "Sir, did you know how fast you were going?" Would it do me any good to say that I knew I was speeding or that I knew the law? Mere knowledge never has nor never will be enough. The implementation of what we know, the practical application of that which we've been indoctrined to, and that which becomes a part of our everyday life, becomes our sixth sense almost. That's what makes the difference. And that's what Paul was talking about. He said, let love be without dissimulation. He's talking about in all our speech and all our actions, and not just in pretense. What he's saying is that if you love someone, if you don't love someone, don't pretend to. Don't try to be who you're not. But he takes that a step further, and the author of this particular lesson went on to say that we're to quit talking about love or merely acting out if one loves, but we are to start practicing true love in our daily walk, in our transactions with people, in our dealings with people. And in the second portion of the 9th verse, it says, abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Two things that are very contrasting ends of the spectrum, good and evil. It goes back that we can love the sinner and not love the sin. I remember Steve Lawrence, when he was here, said there were times that he was disappointed in his children's actions, but he was never disappointed in them. And I thought that was a very profound statement at the time. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. Says that William Penn named the first major city in the colony which he established, Pennsylvania, the city of brotherly love. He named it Philadelphia. We are to care for our Christian brothers and sisters in great affection. And when we do that, we have to be willing to make sacrifices for one another. And we have to be willing to put the needs of others before our own needs. And I don't have to tell you, if you've been paying any attention at all to what's going on in our country, not just the past year, but over the past several years. We have a lot of self-centeredness. We have a lot of people that just seem to have very little or a limited amount of concern above and beyond that little realm that they live in. They don't seem to have any care or any concern for attitudes or for values or for standards that don't coincide with those that they hold, or for people that don't look like or speak like or talk like exactly what they are. And I don't think that's the kind of love that Paul was speaking about here. You know, it's not real hard to be kind to people that are kind to you. What have you really done if you only do good to those that have reciprocated, or you expect something good in return? That's not really much sacrifice at all, in essence, when you really stop and look at it and break it down and analyze it. I thought about one time as I was going around in the community. I had a good friend, their home had got burnt, and I was collecting things, and then I went to my closet to get things. And I thought, am I only going to give what I have no use for anymore, even though it may be clean, or it may not be tattered? Or am I going to give something that's precious to you? Until you give to the point that you've given something that's precious to you, I would have to question, have you given at all, or have you given from the heart? When you only give what is of abundance, or what you no longer care for, or what's outdated. The Lord encourages us to give of the first fruit. And going on, said that, let me see, I've lost my place here, that not to be slothful in business. And I don't think you're talking about just in business, not just in your personal business, but in the business of your relationship with God and in the relationship with other people, Christians and non-Christians. Would you make bad decisions knowingly in your business life or in those things that's going to affect the daily livelihood of your family? Certainly you wouldn't. And I think what Paul is saying here is that if you wouldn't make those type of decisions, if your life wouldn't be characterized by those types of actions and words and mannerisms in business decisions, then why would you do anything less than that? Why would you give it anything less than your best effort in regards to your dealings with fellow church members and non-Christians as well? Not only not be slothful, to serve the Lord. You know, when we serve the Lord, we're automatically serving others. The two are inseparable. So we don't need to be as concerned about doing things for other people or tangible things that can be measured and the acquisition of worldly things. Because what I see him saying here is when we serve God, then the other things are quite naturally going to take care of themselves. Patience in tribulation. That's a tall order, isn't it? Being patient when things aren't quite going exactly to the way that we might have preferred or the way that we might have chosen had we had the opportunity. But you know, we have to reach a certain age in life, and I have become very cognizant of just how little control I do have over things in life. We like to think we're kind of in control and we can make things happen, but in essence, there's very little that we really have control over. The Lord blesses us. He blesses our efforts. But life's not always going to be a bed of roses. It's not always going to be of our choosing. Continuing instant in prayer. That's praying when things don't look real good. And that's praying for people that you might not have thought you would find yourself praying for. It's being concerned about things that aren't directly associated to you or might not necessarily you think pertain to you. I don't think there's going to be quite as many divisions in heaven as we have created here on earth. I can't envision that. I can't hardly see that happening. I think that is definitely not going to be the way that it is. Distributing to the necessity of saints. It says meeting the physical needs of people. Didn't our children and the people of this community and this church go a long ways toward doing that yesterday? Sure, we need to talk to people about God. We're encouraged to, we're instructed to do so. But I've long been of the mindset that I think that if somebody's hungry, if somebody doesn't have proper clothing, if they don't have air conditioning or heating or even a bed to lay their head on, it's almost next to impossible to talk to them about God's love. But if you will show them God's love, I think that's just is a much more stark reality and a much more effective way of ministry. Given to hospitality. Now, some people are naturally more outgoing than others, but I think it means extending Christian love to people. Sometimes it may be stepping outside of your comfort zone. It may be opening the doors of your home, maybe to a total stranger. I've seen things come and go and change a lot in my lifetime in regard to that. It would have been nothing unusual when I first got my license to stop and help someone change a tire or to see somebody hitchhiking and stop and give them a ride. Somewhere along the line, things have changed quite a bit. Both people's motives and people's apprehension as well. Bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. Now that is quite a challenge, isn't it? As I said earlier, you haven't really done a whole lot when you're nice to those that are nice to you. That's just a natural reaction. How many times were we instructed to turn the other cheek? Not 7 times, but he said 70 times 7. And I think it was said that not because that's the number of times, but what was meant to be said was the number of times that is required. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Doesn't shared joy seem to multiply? Don't you think it encourages people when you pray for them and when you encourage them when they're enduring difficult times? I think it speaks about meeting people at their point of need, no more or no less. Be of the same mind one toward another. And here it speaks of unity. Now, I'm not the wise as Al, but I know that we're not always all going to look at things from the same vein of thought. But I think what's being spoken to here is that on those issues that are basic to our faith, that we be of one mind. And that we share a common goal, and that be to seek out and accomplish God's will in our lives individually and both collectively here as a meeting, as a community, as a county, as a state, as a nation. Where would our nation be 6 months, or this country or this world be a year from today, or 2 years from today, if all of our decisions were based upon what's best? What would God do? How's it going to impact the world in which we live, and not just our own little world? Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Doesn't it say that pride goeth before the fall? I've often thought that you've got to put yourself at the level of the person, or at least the mindset of the person that you're trying to communicate with, if you want to effectively communicate with anybody. I'm not just talking about to minister to them spiritually, but if you want to make inroads and to have a positive effect on someone's life, and you've got to talk with them about things that they understand, about things that they're engaged in, about the things that are important to them. Be not wise in your own conceits. The writer here that had prepared this lesson said nobody constantly likes to be around an arrogant person. Recompense to no man evil for evil. It's been said that two wrongs don't make a right. I mean, and we know that we've not been given the charge of judgment over others. Gracious, it's all that I can do to try to make decisions that I think are best for me. And for Nancy and I to make decisions, for Anthony and I to make decisions concerning the farm and the pigs and the different things. I mean, a lot of times you almost get to the point of drawing straws, it seems like. You sometimes just feel you don't know what is best. And if I have that much difficulty in trying to help in the decision-making of what's going on the Nahunta Farm Road, then how can I possibly be telling everybody else and knowing what is best for somebody else, that at best I have limited access to all of the factors that come into making that decision? Provide things honest in the sight of all men. It says the opposite of evil is to be honest. And he goes on to say that our standard is always to act with unmistakably integrity and compassion. If it is possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. And that's one that I have just maybe made my golden rule and tried to strive toward, is to get along with everybody. Some you naturally are going to like better than others, that you're going to prefer to spend time with. But if we take nothing else out of today's gathering, perhaps that could be a challenge that we could work toward better having affection for those that we might not feel affection for now. You know, a lot of times I hear somebody say, well, they didn't speak to me, and I usually ask them, well, did you speak to them? That road runs both ways. The road that, when I talk about somebody not coming to see me lately, and I stop to say, well, who came to see each other last? You know, there's a lot of things that go in, and the bottom line, I think a lot of times that makes that determination is, you can't look at somebody and know what's going on in that person's life. They may be wealthy. They may have a wonderful estate, a nice ride, all the money in the world, a fine education. Seemingly looks like a perfect situation. But you just don't know what's going on with a person sometimes. Is it that difficult of a thing to lend someone a word of encouragement? Can it hurt anything? Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. So I've already said that the Lord told us that we're not supposed to judge others. What does it say in Matthew? I'm not sure the verse what it says about it. Sometimes we can't see the speck in another person's eye because of the log or the plank that's in our own. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. I've always thought that a good rule of thumb is to try to kill somebody with kindness. If there's somebody that you know is at odds with you, go out of your way to speak to them. Throw your hand up at them. At least just smile at them. I've found that work pretty effectively through the years. At least I got a good little bit of pleasure out of it anyhow. I don't know. But I don't think it can do any harm. I know this. I know that when you cut off the lines of communication, that when you sever any personal relationship with anyone, just like it would be if Willie hadn't have fell down on his knees and prayed to God, I'd have to believe things might be different today. Don't you, Willie? He made the effort. He did his part. He left the rest of it up to God. And if you're having a problem with somebody or a problem with a situation, whether physically, financially, socially, spiritually, turn it over to God. Give it to one that is much more capable than what we are. I done lost my place again. I'll find it. Here it is. Somewhere. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in doing so, thou shalt heap coals. I done read that. But be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. In closing, I would just say this, that when you do good, you're honoring God. If you honor God, all the other things are going to fall into place. It also tells us in Matthew, when we forgive others for their transgressions against us, then God will forgive us for those same types of transgressions that we have did against others. In the same token, if we don't have it within our heart to forgive others, then it seems rather foolish that we would expect God to forgive us of our transgressions. If we are willing to be submissive to the will of God and align ourselves with God in the way that we think and the way that we go about our daily lives, then everything else, I think, is going to sort itself out, and it's going to work out. And I think I'll close right there just with a word of prayer. Our gracious Heavenly